The Absurd to Unlearn Beauty, Dada, and Philosophy in the Art Classroom. So, oh, that's not going to work. I'm going to start with a short story. This is a photo of a special person in my life that has helped me find the key to what I felt was missing in Common Art curriculum. This is Jack. He is also in the audience. Before we met, Jack wasn't very interested in visual arts. He was a philosopher through and through. That has since changed, and although he'll probably accredit it mostly to me, I don't think that's entirely it. Much of the philosophies that he shared with me over the last year or so has embraced the absurdities of life, and that reminded me a lot about Dada and absurdism as a whole. And as we shared stories of our respective fields, I realized that like these types of conversations between philosophy, specifically absurdism, and art, these conversations are what we're missing in the art classroom, especially at a younger age. These conversations very much do exist in higher education. That's where I got pretty much all of it. But they're missing in elementary settings, and I think they're even more important in high school settings and secondary education. Jack has been teaching philosophy this past year and has been using a lot of different types of art in his work and with his students, which I don't think would have happened before. We were able to share these conversations with each other. And sorry, let me get my train of thought back. I need to find my, oh, unheard of. That's not something that I think would have happened if these conversations didn't happen. And this, I think, is important in the art classroom as well as a philosophy classroom as well. Go to the next slide. These are some pictures of my thesis work, which is where my original questions started to bubble at the beginning of the semester. So questions about beauty tend to plague us for our entire lives, especially in the art that we make. We want our art to be pretty, and we want everybody to enjoy it. Specifically, using the word beautiful is what constantly clicked in the back of my head when I was making my thesis last year. What first led me to the absurdist questions that Jack would bring up to me constantly was why we make beautiful art. Why do we make things that are beautiful? Why are we attracted to the word beautiful? Why do we want to make beautiful art? My thesis was all about finding my face and reconnecting with myself. And although I feel like I was mostly successful, these pieces look like me. I do think they are the most beautiful versions of myself that I could have made. I asked myself these questions, like now many months out of making these pieces. Why did I make them so pretty and bright and colorful? And I feel like that's a question that we ask ourselves as young artists. Why are our individual ideas of beauty so rigid? Chalking it up to subjectivity is, although a valid answer, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's also dismissive to the aspects of beauty that exist beyond our ideas and experiences. Who's to say my work wouldn't have benefited from looking at art beyond what I find is beautiful? Especially if I didn't get the education I did in Dada art and through Jack, his absurdist philosophies and philosophers that he so lovingly shared with me. Children are also typically concerned with beauty, especially developmentally. They want to make things that are pretty, and they want to make things that are correct. So the questions that I am ultimately answering are, how do we forget about this? And how do we unlearn the standards of beauty that hold us back? Um, how do we inspire those who don't typically see themselves as artists? Uh, because they too are afraid of failing to make something beautiful. So these are just two very basic examples of what I feel would be most successful in the classroom. Specifically, Dada art. This is The Fountain by Duchamp, and then in conjunction, The Stranger by Albert Camus. Um, they have pushed me personally to think about how not everything will always make sense. Things are chaotic, and there's not always an explanation about why they are. Art has the capacity to incite change. It has the capacity to be pretty. It has the capacity to be useless or useful. The list doesn't end when you consider all of these things, besides making something that is correct. Um, Texts like The Stranger by Camus introduce us to the absurd. It defines absurdism as our natural need to apply meaning or reason where it doesn't exist. We live in a purposeless and chaotic universe, but in a less heavy way to say it, we live in a world where not everything has to make sense, and that in and of itself is incredibly freeing. If we were to create meaning in our lives at all times, there would be no reason to question and fight, in my own opinion and my own research. Um, at what point does our life become incredibly boring because of this? I feel like we lead incredibly interesting lives because of this, and having the language to actually define that is really important. So I believe the key is leaning into the absurd in the art classroom. The key to freeing our minds of the danger that exists in leaning too hard into being just subjective is the ability to embrace what is beyond ourselves and beyond our control. So the first instance of the absurd for myself was in higher education, and I feel like that's a little too late to be introducing something like that. It needs to be gently introduced to our brains while they're still squishy, and learning that we have no control over the world and what happens in it is scary, but it's, like I said before, also freeing. And to be able to find beauty in the absurd is to expand one's notions beyond themselves. Oh, keep forgetting I don't have the controls of the keyboard. My hope stays that in creating the next generation of artists will be the same way that absurdism has the connection to art that it did for Jack. He didn't necessarily become an artist out of it, although I think he has the desire to, maybe now in his free time. He did learn that it was incredibly important, and that it opened up a lot more of the world to him than he realized. And I think he realizes that now, especially in the way that he's teaching it to his current students. No matter what a student decides to even do with the art that they make, it's essential to embrace those absurd parts of life, because it'll connect to everything else that that they find in the rest of their lives. It can give them content to make things. It can free them of having to explain every nitty-gritty little detail in critique settings, let's say, or every decision they ever make. Not everything has to be rooted in reason and logic. It can help them better understand why they're even making the art that they make. It can, in general, foster a generation that's more thoughtful and give them the tools that they need to succeed, either as artists or just as people. I believe that an art curriculum includes embracing the absurd, and that it better prepares us to handle the absurd in a real life context. It can be scary, but it can also be freeing. It is freeing. To learn how to lean into the absurd is to unlearn beauty, and this is the best thing we can do, not only for our students, but for ourselves. And that's pretty much everything I have. I'm not sure if I forgot to set a timer, so I'm
Oh,
not sure how far I went in.
you're good. Thank you. So
Good.
I think this